Hi, my name is Elias von den Busch. I am recording this speech on China's global trade influence for my communications class. So, China's trade is not bad by itself, but the influence that China has on the world and the overdependence that other countries have on China can be a problem. And it can create a lot of risk, especially for countries like the United States that tend to rely heavily on China for certain imports such as rare earth metals or certain types of manufacturing. How everything always says made in China, there's a reason for that. China supplies a lot of the world's imports in all sorts of different categories. So if countries want to move forward and be less reliant on China as their primary importer, they need to diversify. They need to do basically what China is doing and focus on making a wide range of products and not rely on China for specific things that only China can make. So they need to invest in certain industries and start producing things that only China can. So the main problem is a lot of these factories and just the industry itself as a whole are based in China, and that for most countries is really, really far away, thousands of miles away. So most countries, it's inaccessible to them. If China were to suddenly cut off all imports to all these countries, all exports out of China, then a lot of them would be helpless for a lot of key areas. And a good example that comes to mind, as I referenced previously, is the United States and rare earth metals. A lot of rare earth metal production refinement is based in that one country, China, which also happens to be the United States' biggest geopolitical rival. So that can create some conflicts. China is responsible for about 70% of world trade, and they are deeply, deeply tied to global trade production. As I mentioned before, pretty much every major product that's on the global market probably comes out of China or one of their subsidiaries. So this creates a problem, right? Overdependence. China can basically control the market because they have a monopoly on pretty much everything. They can affect prices, supply, demand. They can control everything, shipping, and all the inputs that all these countries need, and China can control them. So there are a few risks that come with this. Obviously, supply disruptions, right? If China suddenly stops supplying the United States with, I'm going to use this example again, rare earth metals, the United States is in a lot of trouble. They won't be able to source them that easily from either domestically or another country. And then there's political pressure, right? China can basically do their own version of tariffs and sanctions, and they can restrict the flow of their valuable exports to other countries and basically use that as leverage to hold the other countries hostage, so to speak, when the other countries really, really depend on China for certain things. And going along with that, risk number three is other countries don't really have any bargaining power when it comes to the seat of geopolitics. China has a lot of bargaining power in certain organizations like the UN, for example. Their vote ends up carrying a lot of weight based on this very critical economic factor. So, what are some of the causes of this? Well, manufacturing scale and supplier networks in the export policy of China. China has an incredible amount of scale in their industry. They can produce they are like the Amazon of global trade. They can produce anything that any country wants quickly and at scale, and the quality will be there as well, and that's unbeatable. So that creates a lot of demand, and that leads into China having basically a monopoly on a lot of global trade, and that's a problem, especially for the United States. So a big example of this is their Belt and Road Initiative, where they built a lot of infrastructure throughout parts of Asia, going into Africa, and they're basically investing a lot of capital into these countries. And in return, these countries end up being really dependent on them because China controls all of this infrastructure that they ended up building for them. So Since China is really, really deeply integrated into global trade, as I've said, you can't really isolate from them. That's not a good solution. So, what you can do is you can try to work with them and try to figure out, okay, they have the negotiating power when it comes to certain exports, but what does my country have that I can use to leverage, right? And get you a seat at the negotiating table. And other solutions include diversifying your suppliers. China doesn't have to be the one stop shop, the solution for everything. You can easily find a different supplier. Well, not easily. You can find some different suppliers for a few other critical imports. There are a lot of countries out there that are selling a lot of things. They can't do it at the scale and just the sheer mass that China can, but it's still possible. You can build regional domestic supply chains. For example, if the United States were to invest in rare earth metal mining and refinement, something that China currently controls most of the world's trade for, then the US can become less dependent on China for that really critical import. The goal here would be resilience, not isolation. So, what that means is you can't just cut China off from the rest of the world. You can't cut yourself off from what China can offer, but you can invest in certain opportunities globally, domestically, whatever form that takes, to build resilience and into those supply chains so you're not reliant on China, because the problem is overdependence. So anything that you can do to reduce that overdependence is key. China will not stop mattering to global trade and economics in general. That's just a reality that can't change. The question is, can the world trade with China but not be so overdependent on them and not give them so much leverage? That's the real question. So I used a few different sources when I was preparing my speech. From the World Trade Organization, I pulled some information from their World Trade Statistics 2025. From the World Bank, China Trade World Integrated Trade Solution, March 19th, 2026. And from the OECD, I pulled from Global Value and Supply Chains. From the World Trade Organization, again, World Trade Report 2024, Trade and Inclusiveness. From the Council on Foreign Relations, China's Massive Belt and Road Initiative, as I've alluded to before, February 2nd, 2023. And also the Council of Foreign Relations, China's Belt and Road Implications for the United States, from March 2021. And finally, the World Bank, quote, Is U.S. Trade Policy Reshaping Global Supply Chains, 2023. Thank you very much for listening to my speech.